Now, a week-long tribute to America's 39th president, Jimmy Carter, culminates today with a state funeral in Washington, D.C. Now, all 5 living U.S. presidents will come together to honor the legacy of a leader who had guided the United States through the aftermath of the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War. Now, Jimmy Carter will lay in state at the Capitol for 2 days and will be honored at 10 a.m. local time service in the Washington National Cathedral. The President Biden will deliver a eulogy, joined by Jason Carter, the former president's grandson, and the longtime friend of Jimmy Carter, Stuart Eisenstadt. The readings will be offered by Jason Carter. Joshua Carter and the civil rights icon Andrew Young will also give a homily. And after the service, Carter's body will be flown to his hometown of the Plains, Georgia, for burial outside of his modest family ranch. And also expected to attend the service will be the former presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and also the president-elect Donald Trump, making for the first gathering of the so-called President's Club since Donald Trump's electoral victory in November. And the same group is expected to gather again just 11 days later for Donald Trump's inauguration as well. And joining us to speak more on this, we have Voice of America's correspondent Kane Faribault, who's joining us from the Plains in Georgia. Kane, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on WION. And you have interviewed Jimmy Carter many times in the past, so you know the man pretty well. Tell us, in your interactions with him, is there any particular anecdote that stood out about Jimmy Carter that the people should know?
Well, former President Jimmy Carter was someone who was extremely accessible to the American people. Not only did he do so many interviews with us, and that's really because we broadcast to many of the countries where the Carter Center is doing a lot of its global humanitarian work. One thing President Carter championed, and one thing we talked about the most when we talked in our interviews, was on the eradication of guinea worm. He was so determined to lead the effort with the Carter Center to fan out across the world to curb the infections of the guinea worm. In 1986, when the Carter Center took this on, there were 3.5 million cases annually of guinea worm infections, mostly in Africa and parts of South Asia. But now, today, in 2025, because of the Carter Center's efforts, because President Carter addressed this issue, because he brought a lot of public attention to it, this year there is less than 12 cases globally. Most of those are in countries in Africa. It's on the verge of eradication. If it does get eradicated, this will only be the second disease ever in human history eradicated. It would be the first through prevention. And Jimmy Carter would be very proud, he told us, to have that as a major part of his legacy.
Indeed. Now, you're joining us from his hometown, where Jimmy Carter will, of course, be laid to rest today. You know, Jimmy Carter has been such a huge presence in American politics, even though it's been many decades since he demitted office. What is it that, in your assessment about Jimmy Carter, that has made him such an important and a rallying force within American politics? And despite whether the leaders be Democrats or the Republicans, they've always looked upon the legacy of Jimmy Carter. What makes him stand out?
Jimmy Carter was honest. Jimmy Carter told the American public in the wake of Watergate, when he was running for president, that he was going to be truthful with them and he wasn't going to tell them lies. And that was important, especially because of the lack of trust the American public had in the presidency and in government institutions in the wake of the Watergate scandal.
Right. We seem to have a bit of an issue with the line there with Kane Faribault. We'll try reconnect with him in just a bit. But this, of course, is the legacy of Jimmy Carter. He is, of course, the longest-lived president of the United States of America in American history. He's, in fact, the first American president who lived to be 100 years. And he's, of course, being laid to rest today in his hometown of Plains in where Kane Faribault is, of course, joining us from Georgia. This, of course, is a very pivotal moment in American politics. Remember, Jimmy Carter demitted office in 1981. He's been out of office for more than 4 decades now, but he's been such an important part of American politics and an overarching unifying force, if one may say so, in many issues that come up in American politics. Jimmy Carter is one of those individuals, one of those presidents who's, of course, looked upon. And he's also one of those individuals who, in some ways, is also brings together people from both the Democrat and the Republican camps. He's not seen as someone who is divisive. He's not seen as someone who was embroiled in controversies. And Kane Faribault, of course, is joining us live from Plains in Georgia. Kane, you were telling us about, why Jimmy Carter is looked upon and regarded so highly. There is never a dearth of politicians. There's never a dearth of a lot of the people. But Jimmy Carter stood out as a statesman in American politics.
It was important for Jimmy Carter to tell the American people that he was going to be honest with them and he wasn't going to lie to them. There was a lack of public faith in the institution of the presidency in the wake of the Watergate scandal, and it created the rise of Jimmy Carter from an unknown governor to the presidency to the White House. And so his commitment to the American people to be honest and tell the truth was an endearing part of his personality to the American public, but it was also a part of the issues in which a lot of Americans felt it wasn't the greatest of times. There was obviously the Iran hostage crisis. There was also energy problems, and inflation was very high. So a lot of these factors contributed to Jimmy Carter not winning a second term. But one thing Jimmy Carter was always proud of in his one term in the presidency was the fact that he was honest with the American public. And even after the presidency, he spoke a lot about the fact that he wishes that more people were like him.
Indeed. So he was in office from 1977 till 1981. That's a long time back. And you're joining us from the place where Jimmy Carter is being laid to rest. This, of course, is also his hometown. Give us a sense of what the mood is like out there in Plains, Georgia, where this former president of the United States of America is being laid to rest.
So actually, it's a bittersweet occasion here. People who live here, who have grown up with him, who have been around Jimmy Carter for the century that he called this place home. Remember, he's also the longest lived former president in U.S. history. Nobody's lived to the age of 100 that ever occupied the White House. But Jimmy Carter's family and friends here were prepared for this moment. They've been preparing for quite a while. He's been in hospice care for 22 months. But there's still something about this moment that you can't prepare for. I'm friends with Jimmy Carter's niece, Kim Fuller, who is the daughter of Jimmy Carter's very well-known brother, Billy Carter. And she's also going to be taking up the mantle of Jimmy Carter's Sunday school lessons at their church, Maranatha Baptist, where the funeral services will be held later today. She's now teaching those lessons President Carter used to teach. She told me in an interview we did just a few days ago that the grief of this moment hasn't set in on her yet. She's not been able to grieve properly yet because there's so much activity, there's so much ceremony taking place, there's so much positive attention taking place that she says that when this is all done, when it settles down a bit, when things are quieter, she's probably going to get very emotional, and the reality of what's occurred, that they've lost Jimmy Carter. They call him Mr. Jimmy around here. They've lost Mr. Jimmy. That will set in after all of this is over, probably in a week or two.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Kane Faribault, for joining us from Plains in Georgia and getting us all those details there.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.